Welcome to This Moment in Democracy. This episode was recorded on April 16th, 2024. I'm your host, Saladin Ambar. As we conclude our spring semester podcast, we're curious about what's at stake this summer as we enter the accelerated campaign season for the presidential election. Joining me for the discussion is someone who needs no introduction, American radio host and television presenter Michael Smerconish. Michael is a political commentator, author, and lawyer, a self-described lifelong Republican and former GOP administration appointee. He parted ways with the Republican Party during the Obama administration. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Dean. Happy to be here.
Well, listen, there's so much to talk about, but we do share one thing in common, and that's the Lehigh University connection. I was a professor there for 8 years before joining Rutgers, and I understand you're an alum. Is that right?
I'm not only an alum, but I thought you were going to say hairstyle, by the way, when you said we've got something in common. I was wrong.
Hairstyle and very attractive men, if I may say so.
But you're catching me on a day where yesterday I spent the afternoon and evening on the campus of Lehigh University, and it was great to be back.
Well, it's a wonderful place, and it sort of fits in with your Pennsylvania/Philly background. Without belaboring the point, could you just give us a little bit of how you got interested in politics and how those Philly area roots played a role in it for our audience?
Well, it actually is a story that begins at Lehigh. In the spring of my senior year in high school, my father, who was a guidance counselor with no political experience, decided that he would seek an open seat in the Pennsylvania state legislature. And in my senior year of high school, I became completely consumed in his campaign, which was ultimately unsuccessful. But I had the bug. And now I arrived on the Lehigh University campus in the fall of 1980 when it was Reagan against Jimmy Carter. I quickly founded a club for the campus supporters of the Reagan-Bush ticket, of which apparently there were none because I had a hard time gathering any club members. But serendipity then played a role because Papa Bush, soon to be the vice president and later the president, George Herbert Walker Bush, made an 11th hour trip to the Bethlehem steel plant, and I received a telephone call from his advance staff wondering if my club members could drive the motorcade cars. Well, there were no club members because I couldn't recruit any. It was so darn hard, but I hung up the phone and I knocked on the door of all of my freshman hallmates and I said, hey, who wants to drive a car in the motorcade of the future vice president of the United States? And Dean, when the campaign ended, the people who coordinated that visit were in touch with me and recruited me to be an advance man for the then vice president of the United States. So I had this incredible experience at an early age that led to my ultimately being asked to provide election commentary for Philadelphia radio and television affiliates.
Well, that's wonderful. And I love that term of art, advance man. It says so much.
Right.
Yeah, no question. And I think you had a little bit of experience with the name we don't hear too much anymore, and that's Jack Kemp. Is that right?
Jack Kemp was my boss when I was 29 and now I was out of law school. George Herbert Walker Bush is the president of the United States, and I was appointed in his administration to be what's called a regional administrator for HUD. In my case, it meant that I had oversight responsibility for public housing in 5 states and Washington, D.C., and this was at a time when Jack Kemp was the HUD secretary.
Right. Well, for listeners who may not know, maybe student age, let's call it that, Jack Kemp was a remarkable figure in Republican and in national politics, was he not? He had, cutting edge ideas at the time that we don't hear too much any longer in politics, certainly not in today's GOP. Is that right? You want to share a little bit about what made Kemp a unique figure?
That's absolutely true. I mean, Jack Kemp was elected to the Congress based on his fame as an NFL quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, and he represented upstate New York in the Congress. But he was a deep thinker, intellectually, always, to your point, on the vanguard. I mean, some among us may remember the Kemp-Roth tax cut for which he was famous. And he was always pushing, the bounds of conservatism into a new direction. I remember, for example, on his watch and at his initiative, it was while he was the HUD secretary that he tried to instill concepts of home ownership. He wanted to end public housing and actually put the stock in private hands, meaning the tenants. And I really appreciated the fact that he was willing to think outside the box.
Yeah, there's no question. And on matters of race, he was, pretty courageous and
True.
willing to take on those issues, as I recall them. So, for those who may need a lesson in Jack Kemp, feel free to wiki him or Google him. But uh, Michael, your connection to him, it sort of fits, does it not? You've been someone who's been identified with the center, with thinking outside the box yourself. Could you talk a little bit about what you've seen over the last 30 some odd years in terms of the GOP and uh, what has happened to the party, perhaps both good but also bad, and your place in it?
Well, if the party were still epitomized by Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, and Jack Kemp, I'd still be in it. Because
Hmm.
from 1980, when I turned 18 and registered to vote, through the 2008 election, I should say up until the 2008 election, I was a reliable Republican voter, certainly at the top of the ticket. I voted for plenty of Democrats over the years. I was born into a Republican household. I think that's how most of us I first identify the party of our parents. And I was in the 80s in particular very caught up in the Republican Party and the Reagan vision of the Republican Party, but it changed. And I kind of got off the bus in the mid 2000s after being supportive of George W. Bush in 2000 and then '04. And my initial disenchantment was over the way the war on terror was being prosecuted, because I was frustrated that we'd taken our eye off the ball of going after those responsible for the events of September 11. And now it became folly for trying to spread democracy in the Middle East, which I thought was far afield of the mission. So it was a combination of foreign policy factors that really got me thinking differently. And I had the opportunity when I was hosting a radio program only in Philadelphia, not yet in syndication, that the junior senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, came on my program and we had a conversation about bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, his number two. And Senator Obama said to me that he would pursue the hunt for bin Laden and Zawahiri. And this is interesting, Dean, because he said to me, even if we should find them in Pakistan. And
Wow.
for that, he was criticized by Hillary Clinton, by Joe Biden, by John McCain. And of course, we all know how that story ended when, Abbottabad is where SEAL Team 6 took him out. So I voted for Obama in '08, but the real decision that I had to make was whether I was going to share that with the audience. And because that campaign had been such a journey of talking about the issues and interviewing the candidates and sharing my own thought process, never in a way of telling others what they should do, but rather just trying to explain what I was going to do, I did share. And I must say, on a radio station where most of the talent was very conservative, that openness and my decision were not well received.
I hear
But I
you.
never looked back, and I stayed in the Republican Party till 2010, and then really decided that the party had so shifted. Others would tell you that I had changed. That's not how I see it. But whatever the cause may have been, I registered in Pennsylvania as a nonpartisan affiliate, which is our version of independent.
Absolutely. Well, from anecdotally from friends and colleagues, you are not the only one who's had to make that shift. Much as, frankly, Democrats in the '60s and '70s made the shift to become Republican. We've seen over the last 10, 15 years a number of former staunch Republicans look for a political home. So it's certainly not unique. Well, look, I appreciate the background. I could talk to you all day about Kemp and Reagan and that era. It was a fascinating era for many reasons, but why don't we handicap a little bit, given that this is what you do as well as anyone in the country, and you're in touch with the culture and the American people in ways that I think make you very familiar, but also very prescient, I think, to lots of viewers, and I include myself among them. What are if you could say, well, tell me what the two or three biggest fears, but also hopes of the Democratic Party and Republican Party heading into the summer as we approach the 2024 presidential election? What are
Well,
what would those fears
the
and
hope
hopes
that I
be?
have for both of them is that they have peaceful conventions. I hope that it's a calm summer, because I'm worried. The passions are at such a fever pitch on both sides of the aisle, and each of these campaigns has a really strong or a couple, but one in particular, get out the vote issues. For the Democrats, I'm thinking of abortion, which is undefeated. Abortion rights, since Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Dobbs decision, hasn't lost on the ballot. And that is, among many, that is one of the the unknowns in this election, now that Florida is going to have an abortion ballot initiative, the situation in Arizona, where a 19th century law has been dusted off and revealed not to have been repealed. Abortion is going to be a strong, strong issue to drive the Democratic base to the polls, in the same way that the border politics, I think, are going to be very, very strong for the Republican candidate. There are other things at play, not the least of which is the economy, but I think that those are the two primary drivers. And these candidates are both flawed. You know, one morally and the other from an age standpoint. So that then raises the question of whether anyone will be able to seize a third party movement. I was personally disappointed that No Labels wasn't able to put together a ticket to give us some choice. The RFK Jr. factor is something that's very interesting. I don't think that he pulls exclusively from just Joe Biden. I think he pulls from each, maybe not in equal proportion. I don't know what to make of him, because I don't know if he gets on enough ballots to then get on the debate stage if he's at 15. And of course, then you've got, Trump's legal peril. We're having this conversation as jury selection has just got underway in the first of these 4 prosecutions. Is it the only case that gets to verdict? How does it end? Does it help him where the prosecutions have helped him before the trial? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I've been paying very close attention since 1980. And I've never seen a cycle like it. I've never seen a cycle where there are so many intangibles swirling around the campaign. And as I like to say on radio, there are people whose names we do not know and events that we could never foresee that are about to unfold or become known to us. And I've given up trying to predict what they all are. I try and stay abreast every single day of what the factors are that people are relying on. But anyone who tells you they know how it ends, I think is making it up.
Well, I have 3 children who still lambast me for my 2016 prediction, and I think I too am out of that business as of then. So there's no question anything could happen. We've got a couple of wars, major conflicts brewing. God knows what can happen. But I was intrigued by your RFK take. I listened to your newsletter broadcast. I'm not quite sure what the nomenclature for is it, but I watched the video of you and your co-host or partner on there talking about RFK this morning. What is it about him that is drawing maybe 10, 15, who knows, maybe 20% of the electorate his way? Is it simply name recognition, or is he tapping into something else?
I think it's a combination of factors, and the name certainly doesn't hurt him, right? I think to have that name and to be a bona fide member of the family probably is worth a couple of points just to get started. I think those who haven't paid close attention to him are misjudging it and come to the conclusion he's, best known for or associated with his anti-vax positions in the past. And while there's truth in that, there's much more to him. And I didn't appreciate it until I watched the full 2-hour presentation when he announced his campaign. And then he was in Philadelphia, and in person, I watched when he announced that he was going to run as an independent and not as a Democrat. There are some populist messages in his pitch that I think really strike a chord. To watch him speak at length is to hear him talk about the environment in a way that other candidates are not, to talk about some of the concerns that he has for young Americans in ways that others do not. And to stand in the crowd and look around, it's an audience that you just can't stereotype because it's so incredibly diverse. So he's on to something, and he's a very effective spokesperson, notwithstanding that he has a disability that he talks about, which, just sort of hit him in the dead of night. And he's afflicted with something that everybody, I guess, has already heard that limits his ability to clearly communicate. And yet it's not holding him back. So you put that together, the sort of personal appeal and the willingness to talk about some issues in a different way that his competitors are not, you put that together with polls that show that 2/3 of Americans want a choice, it's just a natural that he would be able to pick up that mantle. I think there's probably going to be a really strong effort by the Biden campaign to both keep him off ballots if they can, and to drop a lot of opposition research if they see that he is cutting into that support that he has. So he's going to be a factor. How much of a factor, we really don't know.
Well, we were called 2000. We know what Ralph Nader was able to do.
True.
And it seems to me that Kennedy has a lot more support, frankly, than Nader did back in 2000. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on him.
And Dean, can I interject and say, I made reference to the fact that, if he gets to 15% and can be on enough ballots to theoretically get to 270, because those are the dual requirements of getting on the debate stage, then maybe he can be a factor. Well, I'm presupposing when I say that there will be a debate stage. And there's another of the intangibles where we don't even know. The Commission on Presidential Debates has already identified the dates and the locations, 3 presidential, 1 vice presidential, but we don't know if these 2 candidates are going to be willing to engage.
Right. It was a bit of a dark cloud for Democrats a moment there when Biden didn't agree to go on the Super Bowl halftime show for an interview, right? So who knows? All bets are off.
Right.
Donald Trump, as of today, is, frankly, falling asleep during trials. That's his morning routine right now.
You could not make it up.
No question, no question. Which brings me to sort of this current moment in our politics. We used to be able to, and maybe we can try that now. Look at certain constituencies. We could, so-called soccer moms, Republican and/or independent-leaning women in the suburbs, Catholics, African Americans, Latinos, obviously, are always a prominent group to think about the shifting tides of the electorate. Is there a group that you have your eye on, thinking about, this year, if X constituency moves one way or the other, it could really play a big difference?
Yeah, I think that I would say 2 categories: double haters, the people who don't like either, and the question of, in the end, could they bring themselves to vote or vote again for Donald Trump, or is he just too toxic? And I think individuals of color, the African American vote, which is going to go for Joe Biden, but is Trump really going to be able to get a piece of that, or at least to keep people from going and voting? And I'm also interested in seeing what happens with Hispanics. And, there's something in the data that is getting a lot of attention. As a matter of fact, getting a lot of attention today that is really surprising to me. And that is what I call the Trump nostalgia factor. And some people listening to us may be chuckling if nostalgia is offered as a positive term. I'm very nostalgic. I tend to look back at anything that happened in the 70s and think that it was nirvana. But when you look at the comparison between how people remember the Trump years on the issues versus how they perceive the current Biden years, there's a huge gap. And the feelings for Trump's governance are better than they are for Biden's. There's a front page analysis on this issue in the New York Times today. AP and NORC broke it down by issues, so it's not just one pollster. And I don't know what to attribute that to. Now, I guess I could say, well, I can attribute that to the fact that things were well governed in the Trump years, but that doesn't make intuitive sense to me. Is it just that we have a tendency to look back at that which is in the past more fondly? There's nothing to measure it to, because in the modern era, there's not been a president who lost and now comes back. I mean, if Papa Bush, my old boss, had lost to Bill Clinton in 88 and then come back and run again in 92, would there have been some good feeling about him because you're always wistful about the past in comparison to Clinton and how he was doing? I don't know, but I find that data stunning.
I wonder if it's just such a deep and pervasive cynicism about politics, government, the process itself, people's relationship to their political leaders, the system, if you will, I wonder, as I'm sure you do, about that. Is it just we've become so cynical that it doesn't really matter, if you will. We'd rather have some other kind of policy and or individual.
But why are we taking that out on Biden and not on both of them? I mean, if you go further and you look at the seven or so battleground states, and you look at the high disapproval of Trump and Biden, there's a lot of disapproval. I did this on CNN a week ago. There's a lot of disapproval of both. But when you ask if you, I wish I could remember the exact words, but I'll put it in common plain speak. If you really don't like these guys, Biden's numbers in the battleground states are all in the high 40s. And if you ask the same question about Donald Trump, the numbers are high, but not as high as Biden's. And, there was such tumult and such chaos that surrounded the Trump years. And yet when people look back at them, a significant number of them are yearning for that. And they're thinking less of Biden than they are Trump. What accounts for that? I can't explain it.
Well, let's talk about Trump's supporters. I've never seen anything quite like it. The stickiness, if you will, towards a particular candidate. What explains their stickiness, and maybe what explains a little bit of Biden's inability, it seems, for the moment, to retain some of that stickiness, particularly among perhaps African American or other voters?
So maybe it's driven, maybe I can put all three of these data sets together and say they're yearning for the Trump years and they have lesser regard for Biden because, put it all together, Trump is their warrior. Like, they're not buying into him on a personal basis. They know what he is. He's not an evangelical. He's the guy who talks of, quote unquote, 2 Corinthians, or waves a Bible that he's probably unfamiliar with. But I think that they're okay with that. They're cool with that because he's going to be the guy who brings a gun to a knife fight. And that's Peter Wenner's expression, not mine. I just remember it because I think it so summed it up. It's like they've contracted out. They've brought in a mercenary because of the contempt that they have for progressives and Democrats. So all of these personal flaws that you said you got the 2016 election wrong, and I sure as hell did as well. But every time there's one of these incidents and you say, well, that's the end of him, grab him by the P. He's done. He got indicted. He's done. He got indicted again. You know what I mean? Like, every time one of these things happens, maybe the reason it doesn't matter is because he's their fighter. He's their Conor McGregor. He's their Jake Paul or Mike Tyson. Like, they're not buying into him personally. They've hired him to go fight for them. That's what I'm thinking now.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, as we begin to wind down here, and I appreciate the time you've given us. It's wonderful to have you. Where should readers, listeners, folks who are careful about how they make their decisions, where should they go to find factual information? I almost put it in quotes.
Two things. Number one, I know we're not videotaping, but you can see, that is my TV remote.
Yes,
that is your best friend. Use it. Change the effing channel. Get out of your bunker or your silo. Don't cling to MSNBC or even CNN or Fox, but mix it up and see what everybody is saying, and not just in the cable world, but you've got to be able to get your news and information from a variety of sources. And now the shameless self-promotion.
Please.
My passion project is my daily newsletter. It's 20 aggregated links that I personally select. There's no charge for the newsletter, but it gives you the opportunity to open up at 8 a.m. every day your email and see from disparate sources a variety of views of what's going on in the world today. I have 119,000 subscribers. We say subscribers, but again, no money changes hands. And we have an open rate of better than 76%, which means people really do subscribe and read it. And the comment that I most hear is that in the span of 2 minutes, you can scroll through the headlines I'm giving you and the lead of each story, and you can start your day with a well-rounded knowledge of the news. That's what we've got to do. Get out of our bunkers and be open to more news sources.
Michael, how can listeners find that newsletter?
Yeah, you just go to my website at smerconish.com, where every day there's a different poll question that's provocative, and the signups are right there.
Last question. Any tips for talking to people you politically disagree with? I know it's not Thanksgiving yet, and we're not having that discussion. But as we head into the summer and things, I'm afraid, may heat up in unpleasant ways. Any advice for people as they engage others who are disagreeing with them?
Tons. So I do a lot of public speaking. My current presentation is called The Mingle Project. And it is me walking through a variety of data sets, polling information, anecdotal information, sharing the result of interviews that I've done with any number of authors, all on the issue of our societal disconnect, the polarization that has sprung from it, and the mental health implications for our youth and some of our seniors. There's a lot of conversation about technology in that as well. And in the pitch, I talk about looking for places where we don't all look the same and don't come from the same background. Community groups, religious organizations, youth athletics, student exchange programs, the type of organizations that our parents, certainly our grandparents, belong to, which have become so, maybe it's a bowling league, maybe it's the Junior Chamber of Commerce, whatever it is, to get out, step away from the technology and have common experience with people. Go to events in your community, support the local newspaper in your community, but re-engage. Because in the internet era, we've disengaged as a society, and that's what's driving the fraying of our body politic. And we're not going to solve any issues unless we can peacefully coexist with one another. Mingle, go mingle.
And well, amen to that. Listen, Michael, I know you have to run. We're so blessed to have you. You have been a voice of reason and passion, but certainly reason for many years now. And it's a privilege to talk to you. Admire your work very much.
That's awfully nice of you to say, Dean. Thank you.
Well, it happens to be true. So but it's a benefit. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Today's podcast has been brought to you by the Eagleton Institute of Politics. Eagleton is a nonpartisan research unit of Rutgers University, New Brunswick. This Moment in Democracy was made possible in part by the generosity of Gerald and Kiko Harvey and Eagleton's many supporters. To support Eagleton's work or sign up for its newsletter, click the links in the description. Please help support the work we do at This Moment in Democracy. Visit our podcast page at eagleton.rutgers.edu to learn more. We want to hear from our listeners. Email us at podcast@eagleton.rutgers.edu to send in your comments about today's episode or suggest topics that you want to hear about. This concludes our final episode of the semester. This is Saladin Ambar signing off. Today happens to be my last day as host of This Morning in Democracy. It's been my pleasure helping get the podcast off the ground with all of you. Remember, democracy thrives when all voices are heard. Until next time, stay engaged and keep questioning. Goodbye, and thank you for listening.